We've received a lot of inquiries, people wanting to know examples or see examples of converting a question into an elicitation statement. When and how to use them, what difference does it make? We need to understand that we are going to have to use more statements and fewer questions going forward because buyers are becoming more sophisticated, especially corporate buyers. In this video, we'll look at 7 different strategies. You can stop the video now and study these, but we'll be going through each one in depth in this video. We want to use a combination of questions and elicitation statements, not one or the other, a combination. And we want to start with the statements or the questions that we use the most often. We want to modify our behavior so that we're talking more and asking less. The problem has been we became very good at questioning, the Socratic method of selling, and we started coming across as an inquiry. It became boring. So we want to spice it up now, and elicitation statements are the way to do it. Closing the sale, as I've mentioned earlier, can happen sooner now, earlier than ever before. We can actually close a sale during establishing rapport if we mix questions and elicitation statements. So let's get started. The first principle we're going to look at is using statements that invite correction or expansion. It actually encourages the buyer or prospect to give us more information. Now, how do these work? Instead of asking, "Are you in charge of procurement?" which is a horrible question, that defines you're a buyer, I'm a salesperson. We want to stay away from that. We're not salespeople. We are trying to be partners with our buyers to help them achieve their goals. We want to help them sell more. We want to help them be more successful. And it's saying, if you're in charge of procurement, I must be in charge of begging for the procurement. So what might an elicitation statement be that would replace that? You must have a lot on your plate managing procurement for a company this size. Look at the assumptions that are built into that statement. First of all, you must have a lot on your plate. Most people appreciate the fact that other people appreciate they've got a lot to do these days. And managing procurement. What if they say, I don't manage procurement? We've just shot ourselves in the foot. In our pre-call planning, we should have found this is the right person for us to be talking to because they are a procurement manager. And then for a company this size, as we will see, the buyer may come back and say, well, I don't do all the buying for the company. I do a specialized area. We want to use a statement like this to determine if we're in the right place at the right time. This invites the prospect to correct, confirm, or expand. Correct, confirm, or expand. Any of those are going to help us. If the prospect says, well, I don't do the entire company, I just do one area, great. If they confirm that we've got the right approach, great, we're going forward. Or they may expand it saying, I have other things that I have to do. What if they say, actually, I only handle tech purchases, and we don't sell a technology product or service? We've got the wrong person. If we do, we continue to move forward. Or they might say, yes, and lately we've had a lot of supply chain issues. When we're using statements instead of questions, it encourages the buyer to open up and give us more information. We're conversational. We're talking about their business and how their business could be better. The next one we look at is employ the assumed interest technique. Assume you have the similar interest. What you do here is you make a knowledgeable assumption-based comment that shows you understand their world. Where do you get that? Pre-call planning. If you're not doing pre-call planning, illicit sales will not work for you. You might stumble across an occasional success, but basically it's not going to work. So make a knowledgeable assumption-based comment. How do you do that? You would say something like, most operation leaders I've worked with lately are dealing with employee retention and rising tech costs at the same time. This is one of the most loaded statements I've seen in a while. First of all, it assumes they're an operations leader. So they're a COO, they're a supervisor, they're a foreman, they're something. So we've got the right department, the right activity in our statement that I've worked with lately. What does that tell the buyer? You're informed. You know maybe they're competitors. You want to be able to give them the best advice possible for moving forward in their desired goals. And you're dealing with employee retention and rising tech costs at the same time. Suppose employee retention is not an issue for them. Their attrition rate is so low they're proud of it, they brag about it. But rising tech costs could be unless they're starting to use AI, and their tech costs may actually be going down. So we put two triggers in this statement that a buyer or prospect could respond to. We could also say you must handle all the vendor negotiations yourself. Now, this was recommended by AI. I'm not sure I like this one so much because the word negotiation puts us back into a vendor-buyer relationship. That's not who we are. We want to be partners in their business, strategic partners in their business. They're liable to come back and say, well, they'll either agree or feel compelled to offer their unique perspective, which will open the door to deeper conversation. We're not getting the company line here. We're getting their personal insights. The better the relationship is with the buyer, the more successful we're going to be. The next one is called observational compliment. This is when you obviously observe something and you compliment the buyer on it. This has got to be genuine. It's got to be real. I had an experience in Green Bay, Wisconsin with a long-term client. The first time I went to their facility, I was going through an office park that had a lot of old, decrepit buildings. There was some dirt. But I drove up to this immaculate building. The grass was manicured. The glass was perfect. It was clean. Everything about the company screamed integrity and quality. I was easily able to give them an observation. This is one beautiful facility. So you could say something like, you have a very efficient-looking setup here. It looks like a team that values precision. So you're complimenting them on something that's real and giving them an idea of why you think they're doing that. It's got to be genuine. It's got to be real. Or you could talk about something you learned in pre-call planning or in your initial needs analysis or earlier. Your onboarding process looks like a model of efficiency. How would you know that? You've talked to some people. You've learned something maybe through trade journals or something on the internet. This can lead to the prospect volunteering insights about their team, their processes, their culture. I love this statement. This observational compliment brings down the barriers, and they know that you like what you're seeing so far, and they're going to be more willing to share ideas with you. The next one is strategic self-disclosure. That is, talking about yourself. I'm against that. It's okay for you to tell the buyer, I've worked with a lot of companies like yours, and I found that. However, don't ever use that old, worn-out technique. Feel, felt, found. The customer raises an objection and you respond with, well, I understand how you feel. And I've had other clients that felt that way, and what they have found is that'll have you ejected from the customer's office, maybe just from the customer's mind. They see that you're old-fashioned. We want to take control and use the right approach with every buyer. Talk about yourself only in a way that invites reciprocity, that invites them to comment, that causes them to give you more information. I've found that Q2 is when most of my clients revisit their tech stack to see if it's still pulling its weight. Okay, here we assume the buyer is buying a tech stack. You could take tech stack out and put your product or service in, and you've identified a time and point where in the first quarter, second, third, or fourth quarter, buyers in your industry or companies in the buyer's industry tend to make this kind of decision. Obviously, everyone is looking at their technology now and trying to evaluate, is it still the best? Is it still the best for us? Or I could say, or you could say, most of my clients are wrestling with the same issue you just mentioned. This is important. The buyer brings up an issue. If you have experience, if you don't bring this up, but if you have experience, bring it up. It shows your depth of engagement with other buyers. You're an industry authority. You're a technology authority. You know more than just a salesperson off the street. And people will respond to things like, that's true. We're actually doing that right now. We're working on that right now. They're going to continue to talk. I've mentioned third-party endorsements before. They're very important. We'll mention a third-party scenario. Rather than talking to the buyer about their organization, mention some other organization that you've worked with, because this offers a safe entry into the topic. We're not talking about them. We're talking about an issue in their industry or in their market. Talk about others in a similar role to theirs. You could use something like, one of my clients in logistics, assuming this buyer is in logistics, one of my clients in logistics mentioned their biggest surprise this year was how quickly AI started impacting forecasting. Look at this loaded statement. One of my clients, I have many, I work with several, in logistics, which happens to be this buyer's market or industry or product, mentioned their biggest surprise this year was how quickly AI. See, what if this buyer's not using AI? What if they're further down the road with AI? And it's impacting their forecasting. We all like crystal balls and prophets and seers. We'd like to know what's going to happen next. AI can do that. Or you could say something like, others in your field are feeling the effects of, and you mentioned a trend. It could be AI, it could be supply chain issues, could be tariffs. This allows the prospect to respond. You haven't asked a question, but it opens a door for their response. They may say something like, oh yeah, we've started working on that too, we're exploring that. Or they will say, we're not there yet, but it's on our radar. What if they're considering AI, but they haven't implemented it yet to the same degree as others? You're a resource for them in a topic that has nothing to do with your product or service. Echo their language back. I always like it when somebody's taking notes when I'm talking. Echo their language back. Use their words. They can't argue with them. If they mention a phrase like tight margins, well, repeat it. Only repeat it later, not immediately. So you talk about the top 3 problems facing their organization. They mentioned 3, and number 2 was tight margins. Okay, make a note. I'd like to take physical notes, and then we'll come back to it later. And then you would say something, not ask something, say something like tight margins, like you said. That adds a layer of complexity that most people underestimate. In other words, you mentioned tight margins, I held on to that. Most people underestimate the problem that you're facing or the situation that you're facing. You want to sculpt these elicit statements, these elicitation statements, with as much thought as you used to put into formulating questions. We want it to have as much structure and as much value as we can. Or you could say something like, that's right, margins really change the game. Or if they had used AI, well, wow, we're trying to figure out AI. Well, you're right, AI has really changed the game. That way you're showing empathy, obviously, but you're letting the buyer know you're keeping up with what they're talking about. This builds rapport by showing that you're listening, and they may expand the thought, and they probably will expand the thought. The next one is one that we use in all of our elicitation statements. It's called tone and pause. The tone of our voice, and then pausing afterwards to allow the listener to absorb what we've said and formulate a response. We're looking for information coming to us without asking questions. So what we do is we use rising intonation in our voice, just like we do with a question, or we use expressive tone that suggests curiosity without forming an actual question. We're not using a question, but we're getting the results of a question. It works like this. Hey, you've built something impressive here. Okay, then you pause and lean in as if you're expecting a story. And if you pay someone a compliment or talk about something like that, they're probably going to respond. And not only will they respond and say, well, yes, we have, they'll tell you how they did it, which will tell you what's valuable to them. And maybe you structure your proposal to what's valuable to them. They mention something and you say, sounds like a game changer. You notice that we pause and nod and maintain eye contact. Nature abhors a vacuum, and people don't like silence. So we say something meaningful and then stay silent. People often rush in to fill the silence with more information. For instance, they might say something like, or you might say something like, sounds like your last rollout had a big impact on efficiency. It's not a question, but look at what you're talking about. Their last rollout. You're familiar with their last rollout. You're familiar with them. This is not a generic question you got off the internet somewhere. And it had a big impact on efficiency. How do you know that? Because you went to AI and said, when they have a rollout like this, what is the impact on the typical company? And they will say efficiency, productivity, and profitability. You got all of that before you even showed up to talk to the buyer. Now, they may respond with, well, yes, but it exposed some gaps in our process. Yes, that's true, but it exposed some gaps in our process. Silence encourages buyers to fill in the blanks. Let's expand that. Silence encourages anyone to fill in the blank. Okay, now it's your turn. It's your turn to develop your elicitation statements, the ones that you're going to begin using over and over again. And yes, you will edit them over time. And yes, a couple of them will come off your list. They're just not working as well for you. Well, how do you do that? First of all, think about, or make a list is even better, of the questions that you ask most frequently. Those are the ones we're going to change to elicitation statements. The reason is, if we use the same question over and over and over again, it becomes rote. It's not energetic. The buyer picks up on the fact that we're kind of going through a script here. We want to look at every question that we're asking and see if it is viable for a elicitation statement. At each stage of the game, what do you typically say when you greet a customer? Change that question, that opening question, to an elicitation statement. When you're probing to find out what their issues are, change that to an elicitation statement. I've laid out a typical sales cycle here. We begin with pre-call planning, which you are doing, right? Pre-call planning. Then we go to first touch, which is typically setting the appointment. Can we do that with a statement rather than a question? Or does it make sense to continue using questions? Then we establish rapport, go through the process, and after closing the sale, we implement. That's part of selling. That's our responsibility. How many of your questions are like those that your competitors are using? Have you ever thought about that? If I use the same question somebody else is using, one of my competitors, I'm just another salesperson. I'm not being unique. This is just another sales call. You know, a lot of buyers can do our sales calls without us showing up, because they already know what we're going to say. Change that. Which ones could be or need to be replaced with elicitation statements? Now, you make your list, think it through, and you'll add to it over time. And maybe you make a 2-column chart. On this side, the question you've been asking, and on this side, a way to make it an elicitation statement. And now you're conversing with the buyer. You're coming across less as a vendor, a salesperson, and more as a partner in their business, which is, of course, what you are, what you're trying to be. Keep a file on your device. I have it on all 4 of mine: desktop, laptop, phone, and tablet. So that when an idea comes to me, when a question comes to me, and I think, I could do better by making this an elicitation statement, as soon as possible, I put it in. It's in the cloud. It'll show up on all of my devices. Refer to it in your pre-call planning. When you're setting up your sales call, what are the things I need to know? What questions do I usually ask? Which one should I change to an elicitation statement so that I will cause the customer to give me even more information than before? And whatever you come up with, share it with others. Don't be selfish. You see, this is a new concept. This is a budding concept. You want to learn from their ideas, and they deserve to learn from your ideas and from your experience. Then consider recording your presentations. Believe it or not, I used to do this with a cassette recorder. When I first started in sales, I was a rookie wearing my polyester suit for the largest corporation in the world, and I'd go out with a Marantz tape recorder, big old thing, and I would put it on the customer's desk or on my lap, and I would say, "Do you mind if I record this? I'm trying to improve my sales skills." Not one ever said no. Many of them said, "At this point, you need to turn that recorder off." Fine. But I go back and listen, what is my buyer hearing? What are my customers hearing when I'm out in the field? Consider recording your presentations because CQI is the secret, continuous quality improvement. Your next sales call needs to be better than the last one, but not as good as the one after that. And as you learn more about elicitation statements, teach others.